On behalf of the Institute of Management and Mass Communication, I welcome Mr. Prakash Nanda to this webinar. Nanda is one of the leading figures in India's foreign policy world. He has been traveling all over the world, addressing universities across the various countries, and speaking in the national platforms in the country itself. He has been a journalist covering foreign affairs with Times of India, with many other major newspapers, edits a major leading geopolitical journal, which is called Geopolitics, and has been one of the very regular columnists for various magazine journals, newspapers on issues of foreign policy. I must say, Mr. Nanda is one of the ardent supporters of our Prime Minister and his foreign policy. But I should also say that whenever he has found that Mr. Modi and his government has digressed from certain policies which he thinks correct, he has minced no words in attacking them as well. So from that point of view, he is a fearless journalist, very fierce in his independent opinions about India's foreign affairs. Welcome, Mr. Nanda, to give this address.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mohanty. Mr. Mohanty, as everybody knows, has been a very dear friend and colleague. Our relationship dates back to now nearly, or rather more than 40 years now. So, you know, we always have this, what should I say? You know, I'll not use that word. It's very easy that thing comes, you know, love and hate, you know, but question of, you know, hate doesn't arise, that we have, you know, differed and we have respected, you know, each other. And then he gave that, you know, introduction of mine, and I am really grateful to him. Let's say straight, you know, come to this, you know, topic. But this time the topic that, and I think this is the second or third time Mr. Mohanty has been kind enough to invite me and interact with you people. So I always thought that it is going to be an interaction with the students, but this morning I was told it is a little, you know, more than that. So had that been pointed out to me earlier, maybe I would have been a little bit, you know, better, you know, prepared. But let me begin now. What is that exact, you know, topic? The how Prime Minister Modi has, you know, transformed Indian foreign policy. Number one, it is, you know, too vast a topic to be covered in half an hour's, you know, talk. I think, but, you know, even considering that, I have little problem with this word, you know, transformed. Foreign policies are not usually transferred, you know, irrespective of the regimes. And that is true with every country. It is not a question within India. That is in every country, because that's why the safe way to always, you know, describe a country's foreign policy is to say that there is, you know, continuity with, you know, change. No foreign policies can be transformed all of a sudden just because there is a change in the government. That never happens. And that certainly has also been the case with, you know, this government. You know, like you say that Trump was there when Mr. Biden came, and then everybody thought that, you know, foreign policies would drastically change. But as you have seen over the last 1 or 2 months, nothing has happened. In fact, everybody thought that he would be punishing the Saudi Arabian prince, but you all have seen that doesn't. So foreign, when people, you know, talk of, you know, foreign policy, one should be very restrained and, you know, very responsible. You know, what you say when you are in opposition and when you come to the government, the situations are, you know, totally different, and you cannot change. There has to be continuity. And then, of course, you can, you know, change the nuances, this thing is overall, but then you can't, you know, say that, you know, I am going to block, I am going to, you know, mark a complete, you know, radical departure, you know, from what my predecessors were doing. Having said that, what I'm going to point out is that I'll be having a little unconventional way of dealing with the things. So the rest of the things, after in the question answer session, if you have, then we can discuss. And I think that was basically what my idea was. And it should be more of an interactive session than the talking. But then anyway, the talking part, I'm just going to mention 5 points, and then we can discuss. And these 5 points are not the usual types that you come across in the press. My way of dealing with it is little different. What Modi has done after he has come now to 6 years in power, I think if one will evaluate his performance in the foreign policy area, I think these are the 5 points. If somebody asks me, I will rather deal the thing with these 5 points. Number 1 point is that I think the power of the Indian passport has increased quite substantially over the last 6 years. And you always think, oh, this guy is an American passport holder, is a British passport holder. And now I think this time has come, and it is to a considerable extent due to Modi's efforts, the way he has highlighted and projected India's image in the rest of the world. The passport power of, or rather the power of the Indian passport has gone up. For instance, there is a global and respectable agency, it's called Arton Capital Passport Index, they prepare. And over the last 5 years, India has made a quantum jump by 24 points. In 2015, the power of Indian passport in this index was 74. Now it is 53. And what is this passport power? In very simple terms, the passport power is that if you are a holder of an Indian passport or any country's passport, how many countries give you visa-free entrance? How many countries give you this facility of visa on arrival? How many countries give you that power of procuring their country's visa through internet? This what you call the e-visa. These are the 3 broad indicators. So what has happened because of our passports power has gone up. Now we are in a situation that there are 16 countries where we can go without there is no visa requirement. Earlier, of course, you had this Nepal, Bhutan. Now we have got 16 countries, and there are 32 countries where you can get visa on arrival, and there are 64 countries where 64 or 60, I think, I don't exactly remember, either 60 or 60 countries, I think, to be more appropriate, where you can procure your e-visa. So in my opinion, the very fact that it has been done, what is ultimately a passport? A passport is the indicator, or perceived indicator of a country, or other indicator of a country's perceived strength or weight in international relations. So that way, I think this is a concrete contribution by Modi. What he has done is that we all know when one talks of India's image in the rest of the world. Earlier, we only were focusing on our soft power. We all said that, oh, Gandhi's idealism, and we had this Nehru's thing. We don't believe in armaments. We are very peaceful country, non-violence, things of this sort and that sort. But actually, it's not that Modi has not used the soft power of India. He has made it, it's projecting India by its smart power. If anybody knows little bit of international politics, if they're familiar with this, Joseph Nye, the famous and American political scientist, they had discussed about divided the soft power and hard power. Hard power is, your military and, economic, power through which you dominate the world, and soft power is rest of the thing like your, cultural thing, projection. In our case, our yoga, our, dance, our this, peace, non-violence, Gandhi. So what is this? Then this gentleman himself, changed that, thesis. He said that, in a realistic world, you can never succeed if you rely too much either on the hard power or on the soft power. So you need a mixture of these, two components, and that he described as, smart power. And I think what, Modi has done, he is using this, route of, projecting India, what we can call this smart power. Of course, this traditional thing is there. He has projected, India's, soft power, like, United Nations accepting this yoga, and then International Yoga Day and things of this that he has not done. But simultaneously, he has also increased India's importance in this, world, because of his, geopolitical features, because of his, great economic, house, some sort of, mixture. That's what I call this smart power, or even that, military thing, standing up to China, which we'll discuss, later. So the perceived, everything ultimately is question of, perceived. We can, debate and discuss how far it is true, how far it is based on, ground realities. That's a different thing. Even politics itself is a matter of, perception. So in this competition of enhancing a country's perceived, image, I think Modi has done well. That's my first point. And second point is the related one. In projecting this, smart power, Modi, unlike many of his, predecessors, has used this power of the Indian diaspora to a great and great extent. When one talks of Indian diaspora, they are broadly, some estimate says 18 million, some estimate says 20 million, and they are in very advanced countries. You might have heard what US President Biden yesterday talked about the role of the Indian Americans. So this, and then Modi, what he has done is that countries that he has visited, and particularly this Anglo-Saxon countries like India, sorry, US, Canada, Britain, Australia, even some of them, you must have seen that everywhere he had made it a point to make a talking points. Rather, they may not have been a part of his official routine there, but he has made it a point to make interacting with the Indian diaspora to be a mega event. Whether he did it in New York, Austin, London, Melbourne, wherever he has gone, even in Paris, he has done it. Even in West Asian capitals, Gulf capitals, he has done it. He has done it with great, sorry. And I'm in a seminar. I'll call you back, right? So I'll call you back. So what he has done is this, and how important. And when one talks of Indian diaspora, particularly in countries like US and UK, one should remember that they are qualitatively different from the diaspora, say of Chinese origin, our number one competitor, or Korean origin, or some countries from there, because our Indian diaspora, particularly that migrated after 1965 and 66, you should remember that. In 1966, there were very restrictive laws in the United States. They did not permit, but I think 1966 they had a law. After that, the quality of the manpower, or rather, or the Indian exodus to those countries is such that we now are as powerful, and in certain studies they say we are more powerful than with the Jews in America, because the education, because they are earning power, because they are total dominant in the IT and other industries. So what has happened is that now, irrespective of the regime changes in these countries, once this Indian diaspora has become more and more prominent and influential, these countries relations with India also will be reflective of their respective diaspora's strength. Let's talk of America. America, if you see the India America in the history, then say 1947 till say 2020, you will say there have been more downs than ups. But what has happened after 2000? I don't think, if you have make a graph, I have never seen the graph coming down. It had come down during Clinton's presidency, when that Rabin Raphael talked of Kashmir and things of that sort. But since then, 2000 until over the last 20 years, this graph has never come down. It is always on the upside. And if you see the last 5 or 6 years, that of course anybody, I'm not going in a detailed manner to this, but if you see in the last 5 or 6 years, this gap has rather gone up, and that is because of your diaspora power. And you see how it is a difference. It is a difference because before Modi, what was happening? You see, our traditional policy towards diaspora. You should remember that when India became independent, despite the fact that some Indians based abroad, if in our history says how the Gadar party played a role. Even the Subhash Chandra Bose INA thing, they basically were based on the support of Indians living abroad. One can say that Mahatma Gandhi himself was a Indian NRI, working in South Africa, and he came back. But despite all these things, when Congress formed the government and Nehru, one of his initial steps was to abolish the Ministry of Indian Overseas Affairs. He said, in his overall framework of, or rather idea of idealistic vision, that once you have left India and you have become citizens of your country of adoption, you must be a good citizen of that country. Your loyalty always should be with that country. We will not interfere, and you please do not also interfere in the Indian affairs. I think that was the Nehruian framework of dealing with our diaspora. Of course, things changed little bit under again in the BJP regime. When Vajpayee came, that IO card, now it is Modi has transformed to OCI card, and then this Pasi Divas and what not. But then the 3 points that Modi, as far as diaspora is concerned, that is particular thanks to Modi, or other credit should be given to Modi. He says, unlike the Nehruian policy of the diaspora, totally keeping themselves aloof from Indian affairs, he has encouraged them to be a part of India. For instance, this OCI card, I think something came yesterday. There are now some restrictions, but not really, because one report says that actually it is in many ways, more favorable to OCI card holders, in the sense that accept your political rights. That means, participate in the political process, that vote and get elected. An OCI card holder is absolutely equal with any Indian citizen. Of course, Modi, somebody who are demanding that Modi should grant this concept system of dual citizenship, like many countries have. You can become a citizen of America, simultaneously you can remain a citizen of Britain or in the Turkey. Many countries do have that dual citizen thing. I think Pakistan also has allowed. One can become a citizen of other country, but simultaneously one can remain. But then he has not done that. Minus this political thing, he has made this. So it is marked by 3 C's. What are these 3 C's? Connect with Indian, and then celebrate. Double C. One C is connect. Second C is celebrate. That means you be proud of Indian civilization, Indian culture, Indian tradition. And third, and which is very, very important, he says that contribute towards India's development. I think that is a Modi phenomenon. That you are not doing well there, but then you are most welcome. Please come and be a part of India's developmental process. So I think because of time, I will not deliberate more further on this. But I think this change of attitude is important, and which Modi has done it, whether one likes it or not. Of course, one can say that it can also become a double-edged sword, because as is the case here in India, the diaspora is not a monolithic block. If there are no differences over Modi's internal policies here, so that also gets reflected in our diasporas abroad, and that perhaps explains why many in the diaspora they are, rather they have expressed their reservations about Modi's policy on this farm law, or before that Citizenship Amendment Act and things of that sort. And people say that the diasporas in America, people say that now they have voted for the Democrats. Not they didn't listen to Modi. That also is a huge myth. Once Mr. Mahanti also wrote in his Facebook thing. This is a huge myth. I think everybody should take that fact that Modi said agle bar Trump sarkar. He has never said that. But anyway, perception goes ahead. They are not based on facts. And I think Jaishankar, our foreign minister, made it clear what he said, and what is being interpreted. That's a different thing. But the point is, despite the fact that this time in America, many, or rather nearly 70-80% of our diasporas voted for Biden, not for Trump. That does not mean that Modi has lost the majority support as far as the diaspora is concerned. In fact, last December, there was an opinion poll that was conducted there in America, and they said that they might disagree. They might have voted for Biden. They might not have pleased Modi by not voting for Trump. But when the question of India comes, and when the question of Modi comes, Modi is there in a popular leader. So it's like in Delhi, people voting in the assembly elections, Aam Aadmi Party. But then when the national elections come, I think it was reflected like in the last elections in Rajasthan, Odisha, and things. When national, although we still are with Modi. The same is the case with diaspora. As the latest opinion poll conducted in December showed that still Modi has got a very powerful constituency. The importance of this popularity, or this hold over the diaspora, as I have explained, is important in the sense that that also reflects in their policies, governments policies towards India. So that's why there is not going to be any fundamental change whatsoever as far as Biden administration is concerned in its policy towards India. Maybe the habitual Modi bashers here may be thinking, oh, Biden came, oh, human rights aa jayega, wo aa jayega. Nothing of that sort is going to happen. And it is not because of Modi, because of this Modi's policy of cultivating the diaspora. I think the diaspora is so powerful and so important that they will not allow their respective governments to pursue policies towards India, which will be not good for the country. Third, one of the usual criticisms in Indian foreign policy has been always that we are very reactive. We never are, proactive. Namaste. Sorry. So we always are reactive. We never, situation develops and we react. Very traditional criticism. They're typical, everywhere. It's not that I'm saying that, Modi has done something, being extremely proactive. No, he has been proactive in certain areas. That two other points that I'm going to deal with a little later. But the number one proactive is thing, that Modi has been, and he will be remembered for that. For the first time in international, relations of recent years, here is an Indian Prime Minister who took the leadership in creating what is called that International Solar Alliance. I think it's very important. You know that when Second World War ended, the global institutions that you see are nothing but, the victorious, powers, the way they thought the world should be. They took the initiative, the UN in its present form, the IMF, the World Bank, anything that the Bretton Woods system on the basis of which this thing has been done. So at least they have been proactive and did this thing, but then India, under Modi, maybe a small step, but then did something on his own, took this initiative of International Solar Alliance, saying that 122 countries in between the two topics, topic of Cancer and topic of Capricorn, where the sunlight are abundant and available most of the time. This solar energy should be promoted and created and even exported. Number one, it will help your climate situation. When everybody is talking of this thing, he said that it is not going to be an alternative to the climate thing that is going on, but it will be complementary to it. And interestingly, he was supported in this endeavor by then French President Hollande. And in 2015, this International Solar Alliance was created. And again, it is due to Modi's credit that it's headquartered now in India, in Gurgaon, and I think its chief executive officer is a common friend of Mr. Mahanti and myself, a dear friend. The basic idea is that by 2030, there will be an investment in these countries to harness the solar energy up to the tune of $1 trillion. As of now, they have succeeded. They have done something in the African countries, whatever the money has come. And more important than this is that 88 countries have joined this International Solar Alliance. 88, and I do not know in the last 5-6 months if more countries have joined. I do not know, but I think if my memory serves me right, it is 88. And there was already one international solar summit that took place in 2018 here in Delhi, in which 22 heads of states had come, and I think because of that corona, they were supposed to have the second summit last year, but in near future, perhaps that summit would not come. The point that I'm trying to make is this: posterity will definitely be giving credit for this thing. That here was an Indian Prime Minister who became proactive by jettisoning the traditional approach of India being, reactive to all the international developments and this thing. It created something in a small way, but I don't think it is a small thing. I think the way the climates are changing, and this has got, great, scope. As I said, by 2030, they are going to have $1 trillion are going to be invested in this. Obviously, investment will come, will further, not only power energy, provide alternate, unconventional energy, as well as, give jobs and things of that sort. So this was my third point. So I think I'll have, two more points. So what is the fourth point? I thought, Acha, yeah. Again, history will remember, that there was something called, that was Prime Minister Narasimha Rao. He had, done something. Even, then 1991, got something very different. And you all must have heard this, concept of, look east policy. So, in fact, I've written a book, my major, book on that, and I had interviewed even Narasimha Rao that time. So this, concept earlier was basically economic engagement with ASEAN countries. So that economic engagement later became, political engagement, military engagement, strategic engagement. And then secondly, it was, confined to Southeast Asia, but then now this scope has been expanded to cover the entire, before Modi came, what I'm saying is before Modi came, the attempt was made to extend the area of operation to East Asia, particularly Northeast Asia, Australia. Advanced one brings Northeast Asia, I mean Japan, Korea, China, even, Russia comes, and then Australia, that side. What, Modi did is that, must have heard that when he said that, no, I am, converting into East policy. And again, that connectivity has been a very big thing. He again, thought of this, concept of Sagar, security and growth of all Indian Ocean region countries. But that's not important. Let's not go deep into it. But then what he said that, Act East thing means, everybody, talking of that, I'll be, what fundamental difference between this Look East and Act East, if you ask me, really, I do not know. But then even I have not been able to understand if he, but in the process, what he has done, he gave, much more importance to India's, Northeast, because that had its reflection there, India's, policy towards Northeast. And whether people may agree or not, that's a different thing. But then if you go by facts and figures, no other, Indian government had given that much, focus and attention on India's, Northeast in the last 6 years. That has been given to Northeast in the last 6 years, at any point in time in the history. And it was precisely because of the fact, before, geopolitically speaking, it was not considered important enough. Take away Assam's, 10 or 15 MPs, the rest of the Northeast were considering another 5 or 25. I exactly don't know the remember, but certainly it is around 25, 26 MPs. This entire, region, the hell, gives care to that. Oh, normally, bala jo chalta hai, rehta hai. I think, Modi made a very qualitative, change, and he linked this emphasis that, Northeast is a gateway to Southeast Asia. That's why, despite this, recent military takeover, we had excellent, ties with, Myanmar. That's a different thing. I'm not going again into details, but what, Modi did is that, one may criticize, and I think I do also, that, he has promised a lot, but then when that, gateway, northeastern part is all right, but our commitments towards these, countries, Southeast Asian countries, our, projects that we took in, Myanmar, they have not been completed. I think that is the problem with, India. We never, complete our projects in time, as is here inside. So also our, commitment abroad also. But Little more than that, what he did is that part he has failed sufficient. I mean, if you are very objective, then you say that perhaps and then we did not sign that economic comprehensive pact, because of trade issues. That part has not been done so well. But then what has happened? The overall, strategically speaking, he has made that entire region a part of this new concept that was not originally his. Others were talking of it, but no other prime minister had the guts to accept that. But Modi not only accepted that and was more vigorous than and to promote it. That is this concept of Indo-Pacific. As you know, America has changed its Western Command. The name is now Indo-Pacific Command, and this entire region from the west coast of United States till that is the American version, though our Modi's version will be further extending that concept, at least to our Western American Western shore till India's eastern shore. That is Indo-Pacific. Of course, all these areas will come. Japan, Russia, Australia, all these things automatically come. But then Modi said that no, we'll extend it up to east coast of Africa. But that apart, this very concept of Indo-Pacific. When this idea came, China was so hostile. What is this Indo-Pacific? Russia never was willing to agree to this concept of Indo-Pacific. It was basically promoted and pursued vigorously by Japan, Australia, US, and then Modi. But now, in the last 2-3 years, you see the situation is such. Even Biden, because Clinton administration, Obama administration, they are talking of Asia pivot. They even never used the word Indo-Pacific. But by then they had come, said that nothing doing that Indo-Pacific will continue. Forget it, the French, all the European countries were uncomfortable with this concept of Indo-Pacific. But France in 2018 or 19, they brought out their official strategy paper and said that Indo-Pacific is here to stay, and we also are an Indo-Pacific power because they have got some colonies. Last one was, I think, Germany. I think December they brought out a paper. They were very reluctant because the moment you develop this approach of Indo-Pacific, you really annoy the Chinese like anything. And given their trade ties and things, that how hesitant they were. But by and by, only major country which has not officially accepted so far is Britain. But this present government, they have already set up a think tank. They have already advised them. I'm not again going into details. So they also are going to accept this. The basic idea is this, and then once you are talking of Indo-Pacific, then this concept of Quad comes. These Quad countries, obviously these 4 are the leading countries. What is its importance for India? The importance for India is that when you are talking of Indo-Pacific, it's a vast region where it consists, or rather, 50% of the world's population live here. 3 largest economies are here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think 8 nuclear weapon states are here. 60% of the world's trade take place here. So the question is, as say Atlantic was the defining geopolitical concept after say Second World War till say the end of the century, in this 21st century, that geopolitical concept is going to be Indo-Pacific. I think that is the growing realization. And the very fact that it is called Indo-Pacific means it is the growing realization that India is going to be a key component, a key country. Without India, there cannot be an Indo-Pacific. Very fact that it is named as Indo-Pacific, without in India, it Not be. So that is the growing realization of the importance of India, and one should give credit to Modi for this. Um, you know, uh, the principles that, of course, is a huge thing. I'm not going details into it. But this Indo-Pacific countries now are saying this concept is based on that your sea lanes of communication will be free. You must respect the international legal regimes. Third, there will be pacific settlement of disputes. These are the three defining features. The international legal regimes in the laws of the Sea Convention. China is not agreeing with it. It did not, that what they are approaching toward the South China Sea. And then, as I said, world's trade is dependent on this Indo-Pacific. How important it is to have open access, the open sea lanes of communication without any particular countries domination and control. So these are very vital features of a future world, a future peaceful world. And the very fact that one particular country is very much opposed to this idea, and the other countries initially were very reluctant to accept it, but as I explained it, how more and more recognition and belief in this concept is coming. Even ASEAN countries, I think in 2019, they had a chapter, the Indo-Pacific strategy, and the leadership role was taken by Indonesia. So this growing recognition, again, to sum it up, if I may say, that there cannot be in a 21st or 22nd century India world without taking India's role and importance into account. And if that is the thing, then one should give Modi a considerable credit for that. Now my last point, I think 4 points, yeah, it's important. I'm talking of the Middle East and West Asia. Here, there are three defining features before, Modi came to the scene. Of course, one should give little bit of, by little bit, I'll give rather quite a substantial credit to Manmohan Singh even, because when he passed that nuclear, Indo-US nuclear deal in 2007, I think 2007 or 2008, whatever is that. Here is a Gulf region, nearly 500 to 500, nearly 6 to 7 million Indians who work there. Our main source of energy there. We are traditionally very, very, very close idealistically to this cause of Palestine. We are very hesitant to deal with Israel openly. Third, we always thought that this is since this region is totally Muslims inhabited, anything you do will have an effect on Indian Muslims. So you cannot think of a policy different policy, the traditional policy, because that will annoy the Indian Muslims and they will vote against it. So I think that risk Manmohan Singh had taken. That when that deal was there, how the demonstrations in many cities of Uttar Pradesh and things of that sort. But not that apart, I don't think so. Any prime minister is so popular and so effective in this West Asia like Modi has been. And you will be surprised to know, I'm going by facts and figures, don't go by perceptions, because when one talks of foreign policy, ये सब बकवास है, वो कोई बोल दिया कि I go by hard evidence. The is the only prime minister who has visited every important West Asian country. In fact, some countries he has gone twice, Saudi Arabia twice, United Arab Emirates twice, Israel once, Iran twice. With the result, what has happened is this: people may be talking about his quote unquote communal policies here, but I think no such quote unquote communal prime minister. I do not know how popular the countries of the region have accepted him as a great leader. That is a great contradiction. I think this is what the answer should be given by the habitual Modi bashers here. He has got the highest civilian award of United Arab Emirates. And the most important thing is that Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates have become our strategic partners. You know that our Air Force was there, they are now doing some joint exercises there. Then economic involvement, and they are promise to invest here. The most important thing is that, can we ever think of a OIC summit taking place in Abu Dhabi and Sushma Swaraj as India's Prime Minister been invited as a guest? And when Pakistan really opposed against this, they said that get lost, and you should be equally when this Article 370 was abrogated. Pakistan, where they demanded all these countries to snap ties with the India. Saudi Arabia didn't do it, and then Pakistan criticized the Saudi Arabian government, so much so that the Saudi Arabian king, they withdrew that $3 billion assistance they had promised to Pakistan last year. While so doing, you also have Iran. This is a great contradiction in the sense that that Iran's biggest enemies happen to be Saudi Arabia and UAE. We are become extremely close to the UAE, or rather the Arabian Gulf countries, if I broadly can define them, Arabian Gulf. Iran is a Gulf country, but that's not the Arabian Gulf. The Arabian Gulf are Sunni countries, and this is Shia country, and historically Iran had its own culture and civilization which is as old as ours. That's a different point. Simultaneously, we really manage the situation. I think I have written an article on this. One can go to this. I write my usual column in some site. I wrote it yesterday, day before. How they have been managed. Day before yesterday, they celebrated here that maritime summit and the Chabahars day, that port that we are developing in Iran. Iran's Rajnath Singh, the first defense minister, going there, and the Iran's defense minister coming last month here, and they are doing things there. They have not disturbed their developmental ties with Iran. This is a great balancing role here. As I said, the 2 points. And number one is that no Indian government, no Indian prime minister has been as popular and as effective in a region totally dominated by the Muslims and ruled by the Muslim rulers. You can say that they are not democratic countries, their kingdom, sanctum. That's a different point. That was the case, if that is the case, that should have been applied before. We have got excellent ties with Israel. We have got excellent ties with Saudi Arabia. We have excellent ties with UAE. These are the countries that matter. The only country in the region, if I now remember, Modi has not visited, that is Kuwait. Except Kuwait, systematically. And then there is a marked feature in his style of visit. Earlier, what was happening when prime ministers were visiting, for instance, Manmohan Singh never dared to go to Israel. Even that Antony was invited twice, thrice, they didn't go. Even leaving that, the second feature was that when the prime ministers are coming, they are covering 2 or 3 countries at a time. That means, suppose Indian Prime Minister visits, he will be visiting 3 countries. It is like, when American president was coming to this part of the world, he was combining, 3 different, 3 countries. You will go to South Korea, Japan, China, then India, then Pakistan. Clubbing of India, Pakistan in one visit was a point of, sore eye as far as we are concerned. But now you see systematically, never happened. The Indian presidents are coming specifically to India. They do not necessarily go to, Pakistan. The point is that in the diplomatic style, this has got, very substantial, meaning. Which, Modi really did very well in West Asia. He never, clubbed the countries, together. He always made it a bilateral, visit. And I think that, ultimately has, paid, great dividends. He went to Saudi Arabia, he went to Saudi Arabia. He went to Israel, he went to Israel. He went to UAE, he went to UAE. So I think when you see the style of your, diplomacy, these things also do matter. So I think this also is a very substantial, feature in Indian foreign policy as far as, under, this Modi government. I think I should, end there. I said that I, point out the 5 distinct, points. As I said that my approach will be totally different than what you read, and they come across in other way. I did it. I thought that, these are the things for which Modi will be remembered once he leaves power. Thank you.
Thank you, Prakash Nanda, for very insightful presentation. And you began your lecture saying that no prime minister can transform India's foreign policy. But by the time we come to the end of the lecture, we really feel that Narendra Modi has transformed India's foreign policy in more ways than one, and in some ways which no previous prime minister would ever have imagined. So that certainly goes to the credit of the prime minister and credit of the foreign policy experts like you who have been looking at it with a very sharp eye. But I would like to raise, there are others who will also raise questions. I have a question about, you said that he has certainly internationally enhanced India's stature. But look at for example, some of the leading international newspapers of the world, Economic, the New York Times, Washington Post, and even conservative newspapers like Economist, they all are saying that India's democracy under Modi is under attack. And that's the reason India's potential for playing a stellar role in the international affairs is increasingly getting diminished day after day. How do you react to this?
Mr. Mahanti, if newspapers really mold, foreign policy, if newspapers, change governments, then Modi never would have been elected. For that matter, Trump never would have been elected in 2014. And I think this, I have been writing in my, various columns. This is a huge, what you say, reflection of Modi's incapacity to tackle this criticism of this foreign newspapers. But I don't blame the foreign newspapers as much for this, because I know most of them, we know how do they operate here. They pick up what are written in our Indian newspapers. As I said, that perception and facts are totally different. And foreign policy, when it comes, they come facts and this thing. What they say that diminishing. I want concrete facts, figures. Let's not give that. Just because the New York Times is not Brahmas Veda, that I don't give it a damn. I think that is I don't read it unless some important thing comes. People do send it. New York Times, Washington Post, Economist. I mean, these, you should, really, since it is a media school, you should be teaching them. I think unlike other countries, or other many countries, here they endorse, candidates. I think this is, something, uh, that, reflects on their, neutrality. I always remember that in our, days, there is always a distinction between reporting and interpreting. Reporters, at least you mention, facts. Yeah. Give facts, figures on the basis of which we may debate, we may disagree. So I really do not, give any importance, whatsoever. Not even, if you can ask me, not even, 1%. Let them, say they have been, doing it, but that, doesn't, mean much unless somebody, I would like to be educated, where at the government to government level, people do mend their ways, or rather the countries mend their ways by what their, newspapers, say. So this, I think, is nothing. I don't agree with it.
Mr. Nanda, you highlighted the issue of the diaspora and how Mr. Modi has transformed the diaspora in the large parts of the world. And yes, but will you agree that when American diaspora extend a heartwarming support to the Modi government's policies, and we welcome it, then we should not criticize when Canadian diaspora are critical of many of Modi government's policies. Don't you think so?
Yes, absolutely. I've written about it. I think, I think I'll send you a link once I wrote again, in this. I totally agree with you. I think they don't matter. I think this is the buffoonery on the part of the Modi government. As I said, this sort of criticism, there has been terrible lacking. I think the Modi government's single most important failure over the last 6 years is that he has not done anything to deal with these negative perceptions. How to deal with some negative perceptions? Either I counter with it with facts and figures. Sometimes I do respect it. As I said, you know it pretty well, and as I get that example, the December 25th, 26, that opinion poll was there. You are still popular, and it always can be double-edged sword. As I made that point in my talk. You can't consider them to be a very monolithic outfit. You should have that guts to even accept that criticism if it is comes. The very fact that they have reacted, it was totally unwarranted. I totally agree with you. Totally unwarranted. That should have been better avoided. I think, I do not know why, or sometimes what happens is this bureaucracy. Anyway, I do not want to go personal on this. Invariably, they are more loyal than the king. I doubt whether Modi would have said that you protest. But sometimes our bureaucracy, they become proactive in this way that will please the ears of my this thing. Whether it is foreign external affairs ministries individual decision, or whether it was directed by the PMO to say this, I really do not know. But I will not be surprised if it is this attitude of our bureaucrats to be more loyal than the king. But then it was completely avoidable, and it was not good. I agree with you 100%.
Now I just have a request to you to, in fact, to send a message to Mr. Modi that look at during the Trump era, Bangladesh, our neighbor, was successful in executing an agreement to the United States so that students from Bangladesh who go to America for higher studies and who get fellowship scholarships there, they will not be subject to tax. But unfortunately, Indian students who go for the PhD program, for different various programs, and they get fellowship, they are taxed like any other international students. So I thought possibly Modi
taxed where in those countries where they're studying.
That's in America, yeah. Modi,
American, I don't know. This is news to me.
Trump government, but somehow Bangladesh succeeded in doing it. We have not been able to do it. So I would, in fact, like you, because
you write, Manti, you yourself are, so active, do write it, and then you have said this. I didn't know this. I did not know this.
You will not read my writings.
I look into it. If there is something,
they will read yours. The Islamic minister is a friend of yours. He will read your writings and will take it to you and possibly do it.
Okay, it's a good suggestion. I really did not know this.
Good. So now we switch to Dr. P.C. Singh, a friend of yours who's been with us.
Ours, not friend of yours.
He's fine. He will just have a comment and a question with you.
Arey bhai, 1 o'clock ho gaya, Hi, boss.
Just a few minutes.
I wanted to congratulate Prakash Nanda for his brilliant presentation. I know, we all know Prakash Nanda. He has been a very keen student of international development and international relations. He has devoted his life on studying and writing and commenting on what is happening in different parts of the world. And we have seen how sometimes he's talking about development in USA, then he comes to Saudi Arabia, then next moment he's in the Indo-Pacific. You see, we are not students of international relations, but we have seen that with the change of government, there is a slight change in foreign policy. Although the basic contours of foreign policy seldom change. I remember after the Janata Party government was formed in Delhi in 1978. For the first time, as Foreign Minister of India, that government, Atal Bihari Vajpayee had gone to China. And that was the first important development after 1962. But I don't want to go into the details. What I am trying, you see, everybody is talking about Narendra Modi. There is no question is. My query is, let us come back to the neighborhood. What has happened at the border between India and Pakistan was surprising because it was sudden, but at the same time it was extremely soothing. Everybody will like this. As a key observer of international relations, how do you see the viability of this sort of understanding? Will it survive for long? Because if it becomes a permanent feature, if there is a kind of a true friendship between these two neighbors, it would be a landmark achievement of Narendra Modi. There is no doubt about it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, PC. See, you used the word hype. The India-Pakistan thing, always, I am one of those always said that, let's look beyond, Pakistan. And that precise, and I always, that's not a very popular, notion. But I do this because of some, again, hard, realities. Modi doing something, different, he did. In fact, first time when he took oath, he called almost, all the government, all the neighboring, governments, plus parishes, to come to witness his oath-taking, ceremony. That is totally out of box approach. It's not that Modi did not do it. Similarly, in 2018 or 17, when he had visited Kabul, nobody knew that in the morning he will decide that he would go to Nawaz Sharif's house for having a cup of tea. So it's not that he didn't do this thing. Similarly, that when Vajpayee was there, he also did the same thing when he undertook that historic bus yatra to Lahore. problem within Pakistan is this. Pakistan's policy towards India is not made by their civilian leaders. Pakistan's policy towards India is not visualized or enunciated by Imran Khan. It is always their army chief. And invariably, you will be noticing whenever these things have taken place, there have some problems. Like you had Bas Yatra, closely followed by attack on Kargil. You had this Modi's stoppage at Lahore, then the attack on Pathankot. The point that I'm trying to say that when one has to one has to analyze the Pakistan's foreign policy making. There are some core areas like its nuclear policy, policies towards India and US. They are always controlled by the Pakistan in the military. Why I'm saying this? These are the handicaps, by any Indian in the government, and including Modi or Modi ka, nobody can do this unless these fundamental natures in Pakistani polity are taken care of. One is that this army control. Second, the Pakistan's very identity has been such that justify the partition, to justify that they are different from India, because you take away that anti-India stance. I'm not talking about Kashmir. Even if Kashmir say is solved, that issue, say that there will be total metamorphosis in Indo-Pak relations will be nothing but a daydream. It is because, as I said, that their very basic identity is such that if they are not anti-India, then they are not Pakistan. I'm talking of their ruling class. So you see history that they read in their textbooks, that it was Pakistan, it was not India, from that Muhammad Ghazni's invasion, and the type of things that are injected into their minds of the very school children, that developing this hostility or this attitude towards India. And then third thing is this development, or rather, I went to Pakistan last sometime in 2001 and 2002, and when I've been to all parts of Pakistan except I think that Balochistan. I asked people there, ye jo mullahs hain, these fundamentalists, they were laughing them. Oh, what are these mullahs? They come from, essentially, though they are in an Islamic country, they also talk of caste. I think they talk of caste no more than we do. Oh, these kablars, karke mullahs, it's nothing. Don't give them any importance. But actually, that is not the thing, because that constituency has developed so much, and when terrorism has become the instrument of your foreign policy, and particularly promoted by military, now they have become a monster, which even the military cannot control. So as long as three basic features are not taken care of, you cannot have a lasting peace, a remarkable breakthrough in Pakistan. And this also I have once did a little bit of research. I have written, I think, one of them. You see the Indo-Pak talks, Indo-Pak these breakthroughs over the last 30, 40 years. What happens is this: some major terrorist incident takes place, then all talks, all relations with Pakistan are over. Then 1 year, 2 year, nothing happens. Then after that, some sort of negotiation takes place. Some small agreement is reached, like we have reached 3-4 days back. And then again some event making development takes place. Pakistani Prime Minister or in Indian Prime Minister goes, and lots of this op-ed writing, so great things are there. And again another terror attack, and everything becomes zero. It is like China's salami slice policy towards India. You go there 10 kilometers, talks take place, come back 8 kilometers, and 2 kilometers still under your control. Similarly, this is this entire Pakistani approach, if you see this, nothing will happen. The same thing will repeat it. For instance, as I said, rupture following a major incident, then small breakthrough, then talks, big event, big announcements, another terrorism, related in the incident, and everything is zero. So this thing has been repeated time and again over 30, 40, 50 years. So it is because of this very basic nature of Pakistan polity. I'm making a distinction between Pakistani policymakers and Pakistani people. So what India should do, I have often argued, I'm not excited about this thing because I know that it is not going to mean much in concrete terms. As a student of foreign policy, I'll go by facts, figures, and concrete development. Nothing is going to happen. But that doesn't mean that you will not talk to Pakistan. I think talking to Pakistan is important in the sense it is a small attempt that you direct at their people with the hope that if you cultivate their people, which we do, I think 90% cases serious cases, medical cases, the Pakistanis will come to Indian hospitals, and they still do. And if you facilitate, better exchange of their intellectuals, the common people, maybe this popular pressure may be having little impact on their respective policymakers, whether they are military or not. I don't think that there is going to be a very big change on that. And the third thing, which I think is a perception. I think foreign policy is also relates to perceptions. The hype, as I said, that when I'm talking of India's power and things like that. If you do it, then you can always tell the rest of the world that, look, we are a responsible country. Our doors of negotiations are always open. We are doing it, but not getting anything in the concrete. So at least you retain your image as a responsible power in the world. So because of this thing, I want some engagement, but that engagement should be focused on Pakistani people. Because this Pakistani government, any such things, unless these fundamental changes in their outlook are there, don't expect any miracle in India-Pakistan relations. That is, that reality. This is the truth. The truth is, bitter. So don't go by any op-ed, writer here in India. This thing, I don't, read them, see their headline and truth, because that doesn't mean by that. And as I said, that prove me wrong if over the last 30, 40 years, the way I described things has happened or not. Thank you very much. But as I said, that we should be responsible. We should keep our doors open, but focus on Pakistan and the people, not on the government.
Don't you think this time the military chief is also on board?
Yes. That's a good point. It's a good interview. This thing never would have. I wrote that. This time never would have. As I said that Musharraf also had done the same thing. I think that was the best thing. Manmohan Singh should have guts to do it, but then Musharraf was changed. And you see, the point is that there, when I'm talking of Pakistan in the military, there are also groups within that Pakistani military. The point is, as the army chief or the general, Musharraf realized that there are no points. Stretching it further, we must not do something. Maybe this guy, what is his name?
Bauja.
He also is realizing this thing. But then how long he will be able to sustain? As it is, he's now on his extended tenure. Who knows? That even I would like to know how much military support also he himself has got. That's why let's see. So my point is that negotiate by all means. As I said, ping this thing, but don't expect anything. Any miracle will happen. I'm not saying that we should not negotiate. We should, but not be very realist. Think beyond Pakistan. Don't think any concrete things are going to achieve. If he's doing it, it's good. Let's go on. But then if something happens tomorrow, don't get disheartened. Don't get surprised, because given the history, it is likely to happen once more. Be prepared for it. That's what I'm saying.
There is one question.
I think Mr. Martin also 150.
Professor Sindhuja. Professor
Hey,
Sindhuja.
because I have to be there at 2 o'clock. Yeah, it's now 1:10. It's the last question by Sindhu. Sindhu, na bola last question, please.
Last, okay.
Because I have to go by 10, and 1 I have to take bath and I have to lunch.
We'll close, yeah.
Sindhu, come.
Sindhu, your mic is off. Unmute yourself.
I am really overwhelmed, Nanda sir. Whatever you have said, I completely agree with you. But I have few doubts regarding whatever you have said regarding your smart power, from soft power, diaspora. If our diaspora is so strong, then the remittances, or you can say the foreign investments level, is still not very up to the mark. First questions I would like to ask is from you. Why this, despite we are very strong, we have a strong diaspora, Modi government did not attract foreign investment to that level? And the second question is regarding your Indo-Pacific concept. Some people say that this Indo-Pacific is nothing but an Asian NATO. When we signed an agreement with United States, especially the BECA, Basic Exchange and Cooperation Act, some critics raised their voice that India has sold its sovereignty to United States. Now, Americans will use our technology, our information, our communication linkages, and then they will maneuver us. So, what is your opinion on that? These two things.
I'll be giving very short answers. I'm sorry. This itself is a matter of, one seminar.
And don't we have this.
No, I know. Let me answer here. When you compare, thing, you see that what is the base and what has happened over the last 6 years. So you have to compare what was the quantum of foreign investments, say in 2014 from the diaspora, and what is the quantum of foreign investment from the diaspora in 2020. So if say the amount in 2000 was X and 2020 is Y, and if that Y is greater than X, that means there has been some improvement, not full improvement, but there has been some improvement. One, you can't say that all of a sudden, and then what is the thing that you will, and then when you give that it has not been good, it is again a very relative term. What exactly you mean by good? What should be its quantum? Where with which quantum you will compare it? That leads to further questions. And second thing is this. Maybe this is a very typical, Indian attitude, traditional thing. हम बहुत बड़े हैं, हम great, बाकी सब लोग हमको करेंगे, हम तो कुछ नहीं करेंगे, कुछ नहीं देंगे. That partly answers your, the second part, but then I'm talking of the foreign investment part. When any investor will come, this doesn't require any Nobel laureate in economics to say this thing. You want to investment. You want to invest, suppose koi ek yahan industry aap banaoge. Industry, the first thing you require in the land. This is the mind-boggling, law you have that, if you want to procure land, you have to give 500%, more than the market rate, because you have got your law. कोई आके करके 500 ड्रम करके मैं जाके इन्वेस्टमेंट करूंगा. Secondly, you, of course, Modi now have changed the labor laws, and I think they have not been implemented. They are going to be implemented, I think, from next month. You say the no, ये सब है. अब बोलोगे हमारा ये law है, reservations करोगे. Yes, then you do not have the adequate infrastructure in the sense that I am not assured of connectivity. whether there is electricity there, pani there, roads are there, and these things are happening, but these things are not there. To expect that that is why I think that there is one of the major developments. I think people do point out that if the Modi government does not take bold steps. आप अभी farm laws कर दिया. Now everybody is saying there is nothing against this. I think that is facilitated, but then the perception is there. आपने बैठ के कर रहे हो 4-5 महीने. Incidents like this अभी जितना आता है, I think despite that अगर वो आके you have got a record in a foreign exchange reserves, I think is a great thing, because people still have faith and expectation मोदी कुछ न करेगा. अगर वो नहीं कर पाएगा तो ये भी और कुछ नहीं, वो तो खत्म हो जाएगा. So don't blame the investors. You just put your own house in order. You do not give land, you do not have labor law, you do not have necessary infrastructure, and you think that सब लोग सब छोड़ के चाइना फाइना सब छोड़ के हमारा हिंदुस्तान आ जाएंगे. भाई साहब ये ऐसे होता नहीं है. कोई philanthropy नहीं कर रहा है. They are not doing any philanthropic activity. They are doing hard business. आप भी करोगे, हम भी करेंगे, हम भी वही सोचेंगे. Second part, Indo-Pacific, you are confusing that concept of Indo-Pacific with Quad. Quad is, you can say that some critics are saying that that is ASEAN, NATO is 4 countries, but the Indo-Pacific do not consist of these 4 countries. I think that is a distinction you have to make. Indo-Pacific will be the entire region. That concept is I think there can be 5 hours talk on that. What this concept is. Only important point that I am to say is that in this 21st century world, the global politics have to give India its due. Without the involvement of India, the 21st century politics will be incomplete. I think that is what I mean by this entire Indo-Pacific. This Quad, ASEAN, NATO, Quad is a small feature of it. You may agree, you may disagree, and that is not, it is not a military collaboration. Those who are saying that basically the political parties are talking of. I have not seen any responsible foreign policy analyst in India or even abroad saying that this is ASEAN NATO. On the other hand, I have seen some analysts saying that you make it an ASEAN NATO. That people are not agreeing with. The only criticism that I have, again, habitual naysayers, Sitaram Yechuri says, and some other, Rahul Gandhi says, that's a different point. These are political criticisms. I have not seen any responsible foreign policy expert and analyst anywhere saying that it is an ASEAN NATO. But then, as I said, that is confined to this idea of Quad. And Quad is not necessarily Indo-Pacific. I think Indo-Pacific is concept is too big, and which everybody is recognizing. How to manage things in that Indo-Pacific, that is one of the instruments. Whether this instrument is perfect or not, that always will remain debatable. But we are talking about the very idea. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nanda. Our students would have asked questions, but you are in a hurry. So, but I'm sure even if they are not able to ask questions, they would have
some other time. Okay.
Yeah, immensely benefited from your lecture. Thank you for a very insightful lecture and giving your valuable time to our institute for the benefit of our teachers and our students. Thank you again. Bye.
Bye-bye.